Do you believe there's an age when society silently decides, from here on, you no longer matter? No one ever says it out loud, but the looks, the whispers, the silence, they say everything. In a small town in the American West, back in 1885, a 55-year-old woman was placed on an auction block like unwanted property. Not because she had committed a crime, not because she was lazy or cruel, but simply because she was old, too old to be loved, too old to be protected, too old to be seen as someone with a future. The crowd laughed, her family turned away, and the world quietly agreed that her life had already expired, until one man stepped forward from the crowd. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, he was broken himself, but he carried something far more dangerous: integrity. And with a single sentence, he silenced the entire square. She's not something to be bought and sold. She's a human being. From that moment, a life that was meant to disappear began again. And the story you're about to hear will force you to ask the most important question of all. Is it ever truly too late to be loved and to belong? The sun had barely risen over Riverside, California, yet the town square was already alive with murmurs. Not the warm kind, no laughter. No greetings, but the sharp, hushed whispers that carried judgment. People gathered the way they always did for these auctions, curious, bored, and cruelly entertained. By the time Hannah Williams was led onto the wooden platform, the verdict had already been decided. She stood barefoot on the sun-scorched boards, her toes curling slightly as the heat burned through the thin skin. At 55 years old, Hannah had learned long ago not to flinch. Flinching invited laughter. Weakness invited cruelty. So she stood still, spine straight, hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, anywhere but their faces. The auctioneer cleared his throat with visible irritation, as though even speaking her name was an inconvenience. Hannah Williams, 55 years old, still capable of work, laundry, cooking, basic household, labor. The words fell flat, stripped of dignity. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd like a sickness. Who'd waste food on something that old? A woman sneered. Another voice followed. She'll drop dead before winter. Hannah heard them all. She always did. But what hurt most wasn't the insults, it was the familiarity of them. She had been hearing versions of the same words for decades. Too old to slow, too tired, too much trouble. She hadn't always been invisible. There was a time when she had been a wife, when someone reached for her hand without hesitation. There was a time when her voice mattered in her own home. That time ended the winter her husband died, leaving her with grief and a responsibility she never asked for. Raising her nephew Jacob after his parents passed. She fed him, clothed him, protected him. She worked until her back ached and her hands cracked open in the cold. And now Jacob stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ground. His wife had insisted on this. One less mouth to feed during the drought. One less burden. Hannah understood that, too. Understanding didn't make it hurt less. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. Bidding starts now. Silence. Not the respectful kind, the dismissive kind. People glanced at one another, weighing the cost of bread against the value of an aging woman. Coins jingled in pockets, then stayed there. No one stepped forward. Hannah swallowed. She told herself this was just another moment to survive. She had survived worse. Then a voice cut through the square like thunder. "You're not buying her like cattle." Every head turned. A man stepped out of the crowd, his boots worn, his clothes dust-stained from travel. He was younger than most early 30s, maybe, but there was nothing careless about him. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight with restrained fury. Storm grey eyes locked onto the auctioneer, then shifted to Hannah, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. His hand slammed a leather pouch onto the auctioneer's table. Coins spilled across the wood, flashing in the sunlight. "That's 3 months' wages," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "More than enough." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Money like that could feed a family for half a year. The auctioneer hesitated. "Sir, this is highly irregular. What did her family get for putting her up here?" the man demanded. The square went silent. Hannah's voice broke the stillness, steady despite the tightness in her chest. "1 bag of flour, so they wouldn't starve this winter." The man's expression darkened. Something fierce passed through his eyes, not anger at her, but at the world that had made this possible. He turned back to the auctioneer. "That money covers whatever debt you think she owes." Then he faced Hannah fully. "I'm Logan Harrison," he said. "I've got a ranch 15 miles south. I need help. I pay fair wages." He paused, making sure every word landed. "But I'm not buying you. If you come with me, it's because you choose to." Hannah stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure others could hear it. "No contracts," Logan continued. "No ownership. You work. I pay you. If you ever want to leave, I'll take you anywhere you want and give you enough to start over." No one had ever spoken to her like that. "Why me?" she whispered. Logan didn't hesitate. "Because everyone else sees your age. I see a survivor." For the first time in decades, Hannah felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Hope. Logan extended his hand steady, open, patient. Hannah looked at it for a long moment, at the calluses, the dirt under the nails, the quiet promise of choice. Then she placed her weathered hand in his, and the world, which had already written her ending, was forced to begin again. The Harrison Ranch unfolded beneath the afternoon sun like a promise Hannah had never dared to make to herself. Golden fields stretched toward the horizon, broken only by fences that leaned from years of neglect, and a barn that carried the quiet exhaustion of hard seasons. It wasn't beautiful in the way townsfolk might define beauty, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, Hannah felt something loosen inside her chest. Logan showed her to a small guest room at the back of the house. "There's a lock on the door," he said, almost casually. "Use it if you want." A lock. Hannah waited until he left before closing the door. Behind her, she ran her fingers along the solid wood, then turned the metal key. The click echoed louder than it should have. Privacy wasn't something she'd known in a very long time. She sat on the edge of the bed, an actual bed, with clean sheet sand, pressed her hands to her face until her shoulders shook. The next morning, the smell of coffee pulled her from sleep. Logan had set bread and preserves on the table. Pouring her a cup without a word of command, or expectation. "Long day ahead," he said. "We'll take it steady." They worked side by side, checking fences, counting supplies, taking stock of what could be saved and what needed rebuilding. Logan explained his plans openly, asking for her opinion instead of issuing orders. When they reached a collapsed section of fence, he hesitated. "These posts weigh about 50 pounds. He warned. "Don't strain yourself." Hannah answered by lifting the posts one on each shoulder and carrying them toward the worksite. Without breaking stride, Logan stared. "You'll hurt yourself." She shook her head. "I've carried." Heavier. Something shifted in his expression. Not disbelief. Anger, but not at her. At whatever life had demanded that kind of strength from a woman who had never been given rest. They worked until the sun dipped low, sweat soaking their clothes, muscles burning. Yet Hannah felt lighter than she had in years. That evening, Logan spoke again, quietly. "If anything in the house doesn't work for you, we fix it," he said. "You tell me. We make it right." No one had ever asked whether she fit into a space. No one had ever cared if she was comfortable. Weeks passed. The ranch began to breathe again. Fences stood straight. The barn grew stronger. And Hannah found herself laughing softly at first, as if afraid the sound might disappear if she held onto it too tightly. One afternoon, they rested beneath an oak tree near the creek. Logan handed her a canteen. "You're stronger than anyone I've worked with," he said. "This place was dying. With you here, it has a real chance." Hannah waited for the cruelty that usually followed praise. It never came. Instead, Logan added, "If you're willing, I'd like to offer you more than wages. Stay 2 years, and when we sell stock, you get a share of the profits. A real stake." Her hands trembled. "No one's ever offered me a share of anything. You've earned it," he replied. That night, over dinner, Logan asked about her life. She told him everything, and when she finished, he said only this: "You deserved better." For the first time in 55 years, Hannah believed it might still be true. The riders came at dawn. Hannah was in the garden when she heard the hooves of 5 horses cutting through the quiet morning. Like a warning, dust rose along the road, drifting over the fields they had worked so hard to restore. She straightened slowly, tightening her grip on the hoe, every sense alert. Logan stepped out of the house, his expression already hardening. The lead rider dismounted with practiced ease. He wore a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "Name's Garrett," he said. "Mr. Thornton sent us." Logan didn't move. "What do you want?" Garrett gestured lazily at the ranch. "Mr. Thornton has an offer. Sell the land. If not, well, fires start easy this time of year. Accidents happen." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Before Logan could respond, Hannah stepped forward. "There's a flaw in your plan," she said calmly. Garrett turned, surprised. "And what would that be?" "Threatening arson gets a man hanged in California," Hannah replied. 5 witnesses is for 2. Many. Mr. Thornton knows that. The rider studied her, eyes narrowing. "You think an old woman can stop 5 armed men?" "I think you were sent to scare us," Hannah said evenly, "not to kill us. Violence leaves evidence. Thornton is too smart to leave evidence." Silence stretched. Garrett spat into the dirt. "This isn't over." The riders left as quickly as they came. Logan exhaled shakily. That was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever seen. They didn't hurt us, Hannah said, though her hands trembled now that the danger had passed. That's what matters. They rode into town that same day and filed a complaint with the sheriff. The threat became public, and once something lived in daylight, it lost much of its power. Weeks passed without incident, but tension lingered like heat before a storm. They worked harder than ever. One evening, Hannah climbed into the barn loft to check the hay stores. The plank beneath her boots cracked. She fell. Her hands caught a support beam at the last second, splinters biting into her palms. Her arms screamed as her weight pulled her downward. Hannah, Logan's voice tore through the barn. He scrambled up the ladder, flattening himself against the loft floor, stretching out until his fingers locked around her wrists. "I've got you," he said, gripping tight. They hauled her back onto solid wood. Hannah collapsed, gasping. Logan pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him upright. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I can't lose you." When he pulled back, his hands were shaking. His eyes were raw with fear. "You matter to me," he said, "more than I can explain." Hannah didn't pull away. "You matter to me, too." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to turn away. She didn't. Their kiss was gentle at first, then real full of everything they'd survived. That night, by the fire, Logan spoke the words that changed everything. "Marry me." Hannah's breath caught. "I love you," he said, "not despite your strength because of it." Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. For the first time, love didn't ask her to disappear. It asked her to stay. Winter came hard that year, pressing against the ranch with ice and wind. But Hannah and Logan faced it together. Snow piled against the fences they had rebuilt, and the barn groaned under the weight of frozen nights. Yet inside the house, warmth endured shared meals, shared silence, shared resolve. The wedding was simple. 2 vows spoken in the sheriff's office, witnessed by a handful of townspeople who now looked at Hannah with something new in their eyes. Respect. When Logan said "I do," his voice never wavered. When Hannah spoke the same words, they rang like freedom. Spring arrived with trouble close behind. One evening, a young woman collapsed at their door, half frozen and terrified. Her name was Sarah. Between sobs, she told them about Thornton, how he had threatened her family, how he intended to force her into servitude. This time, Logan didn't just go to the sheriff. He brought a newspaper reporter. Sarah's story spread quickly. The sheriff filed charges. Warrants followed. When they rode to Thornton's ranch, his empire crumbled under the weight of daylight. As they dragged him away, Thornton screamed at Hannah, "This is your fault. You'll lose everything." Logan sat beside her, taking her hand. "No," he said quietly. "We won't. We have each other." Sarah stayed with them, becoming family in every way that mattered. Months later, Hannah stood on the porch one evening, nervous in a way she had never known. Logan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. She took a breath. "The doctor came by yesterday." His face tightened. "Are you sick?" "No," she said, tears forming. "Logan, I'm going to have a baby." Time seemed to stop. Then Logan dropped to his knees in front of her, laughter and tears colliding as he pressed his hand to her stomach. "We're having a baby," he whispered. At 55, Hannah had thought motherhood was a door long closed. Yet here it was wide open. Their son was born on a cold February morning. Logan held the crying infant with reverence. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." They named him Samuel. At the harvest festival months later, Hannah stood beside Logan, her face radiant, her life unrecognizable from the woman once auctioned as worthless. Logan slid a silver bracelet onto her wrist, carved with 3 images: a mountain, a barn, and a woman standing tall. "You were never too old," he said. "You were always just right." The crowd cheered. Hannah looked out at the land, at the family she had built, and understood the truth she had waited a lifetime to hear. Her life had not ended at 55. It had begun. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm Hannah once believed she would never know. Mornings began with birdsong and the steady weight of responsibility, not the crushing kind she had carried for decades, but the grounding kind that reminded her she belonged somewhere. Logan rose early, Samuel often tucked against his chest, whispering to the boy as though explaining the world one sunrise at a time. Hannah watched them from the doorway more often than she admitted. There was still a part of her that expected everything to vanish if she blinked too long. Old habits of survival didn't disappear overnight. But each day the ranch stood strong, each laugh echoed through the house, and the fear loosened its grip. Sarah grew into her place beside them, fierce and kind in equal measure. She helped with the animals, learned the land, and called Hannah Ma without hesitation. The word struck Hannah every time, not with pain, but with awe. Family, she learned, wasn't always the one you were born into. Sometimes it was the one you fought to protect. The town changed too. People who once avoided Hannah's eyes now greeted her by name. Some apologized, others didn't, but their respect was clear in the way they spoke, the way they listened. Hannah accepted it quietly. She had no need for revenge. Living well was enough. One evening, as the sun sank, Logan painted the valley gold. Hannah and Logan sat on the porch steps, Samuel asleep between them. Logan traced the lines on Hannah's weathered hands. "You know," he said softly, "if I hadn't spoken up that day." Hannah shook her head. "Someone would have. Eventually." Logan smiled. "I'm glad it was me." She leaned into his shoulder, feeling the steady truth of him there. For so long, she had believed strength meant enduring pain in silence. Now she understood something deeper. True strength was allowing yourself to be seen. As the years passed, the ranch prospered, not because luck had finally smiled on them, but because it was built on fairness, trust, and shared labor. Hannah taught Samuel the same lessons. She had learned the hard way that no person's worth could be measured by age, appearance, or what they could produce for others. Sometimes, travelers passed through and recognized her story. They asked how it felt to find love so late in life. Hannah always answered the same way. "It wasn't late," she said. "It was right on time." On quiet nights, when the stars stretched endlessly above the fields, Hannah thought about the woman she had once been standing barefoot on an auction block, waiting to be erased. She wished she could reach back through time and take that woman's hand. She would tell her this: "You are not invisible. You are not expired. You are not too old." And somewhere in the distance, Samuel's laughter would rise into the night, living proof that beginnings do not ask permission from age. They only ask for courage, and Hannah had finally given herself that. Years later, when people spoke of the Harrison Ranch, they no longer talked about land or cattle first. They talked about Hannah. They talked about the woman who rebuilt fences with hands the world had dismissed. The woman who stood her ground when armed men tried to frighten her into silence. The woman who had once been auctioned off like a burden and later became the heart of a community. Hannah never sought recognition. She worked. She listened. She loved. That was enough. Samuel grew quickly, curious and steady, with Logan's eyes and Hannah's calm resilience. From the time he could walk, he followed his mother through the fields, asking endless questions. She answered them patiently, never brushing him aside, never making him feel small. She knew too well what it meant to be overlooked. One afternoon, when Samuel was old enough to understand stories, he asked her about the silver bracelet she always wore. "It reminds me of who I am," Hannah said, tracing the etched images with her thumb. "Why do you need reminding?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Because the world forgets sometimes. And so do we." Logan watched them from the porch, pride filling his chest. He often said that loving Hannah had taught him a new definition of strength, one that wasn't too loud or forceful, but steady and unbreakable. As time passed, the town square changed. The auction platform was torn down, replaced by a small market where people traded goods without cruelty or spectacle. When someone suggested naming the square after Hannah, she refused at first. "I didn't do anything special," she said. Logan took her hand. "You reminded people how to be human." The name stayed. On the day the sign was raised, Hannah stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. She felt no triumph, only peace, the kind that comes when wounds finally close. That evening, she and Logan walked the fields together, the same land that had once felt uncertain beneath her feet. The sky burned with color as the sun dipped low. "Do you ever think about that day?" Logan asked. "Yes," Hannah said, "but not the way I used to." She no longer saw the auction block when she remembered it. She saw the hand that reached out, the voice that said she had a choice. "I think people believe life gives second chances to the young," she said. "But it doesn't work that way." Logan nodded. "Life gives them to the brave." Hannah smiled. Later that night, as she tucked Samuel into bed, he looked up at her with complete trust. "Ma," he said, "you're strong." She kissed his forehead. "So are you." When Hannah lay beside Logan, listening to the quiet breathing of a home full of love, she understood something that had once felt impossible. Her story was never about age. It was about worth, and worth, she had learned, doesn't fade. It waits patiently for someone to see it, and when it's finally seen, it changes everything. On the morning Hannah turned 65, the ranch was quiet in a way that only comes from peace earned over time. Mist hovered low over the fields, and the fences stood straight against the rising sun, silent witnesses to everything that had changed. Logan surprised her with breakfast on the porch. Nothing extravagant. Fresh bread, coffee, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a simple journal, its leather worn soft. "So you don't forget," he said gently. Hannah smiled. She had learned that forgetting didn't mean losing the past, it meant being free from it. Later that day, neighbors stopped by, bringing food, stories, and laughter. Some were new faces. Others were people who had once looked away. They spoke to her now with ease, as though she had always belonged. Hannah welcomed them without bitterness. Life was too full to carry resentment. As evening settled in, Samuel ran ahead toward the creek, his laughter echoing through the trees. Sarah followed, teasing him, the bond between them unbreakable. Hannah watched, her hand resting over her heart. She thought about the years she had spent believing her best days were behind her. How easily that belief had been planted. How long it had taken to uproot. Logan joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "You know," he said, "some people think this story is about romance." Hannah tilted her head. "Isn't it? It's about choice," he replied. "Yours." She considered that, then nodded. Love had come because she chose not to disappear. Because she stepped forward when a hand was offered not to be saved, but to stand beside someone. That night, as stars filled the sky, Hannah opened the journal Logan had given her. She wrote slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything now. She wrote about the woman she used to be the one who survived by becoming invisible. Then she wrote about the woman she had become. Strong, seen, chosen. In the final pages, she wrote something she hoped Samuel would one day read. "Do not measure your life by the years you have lived. Measure it by the moments you had the courage to begin again." When she closed the journal, she felt complete. Years later, people would still tell her story, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes softened, but Hannah didn't mind. The truth was simple enough. She had been told she was too old. She wasn't. She had been told her life was over. It wasn't. And somewhere out there, someone would hear her story and realize something for the first time. It is never too late to be seen. It is never too late to be loved. It is never too late to begin. Hannah Harrison knew that because she had lived it, and her life once nearly erased had become a reminder written into the land itself.